August 1988. A soundstage at Warner Brothers Studios, Burbank, California. A second unit insert day on a picture that does not need its star present for most of the footage being shot. Clint Eastwood is 58 years old. He is sitting in a canvas chair near the monitor, not because he has to be, but because he wants to watch how a sequence he wrote is being handled by a director 29 years younger than he is. The director's name is Marcus Webb. He is 29 years old. He has directed one feature film, a modestly successful thriller that the trade papers praised for its energy and its visual confidence. He has been given this second unit assignment as a kind of audition, a chance for the studio to see how he handles pressure on a production with a star whose name alone could end careers. Marcus Webb does not understand yet what that name is capable of ending. He is about to find out. Here is the story. Marcus Webb had grown up in Los Angeles, the son of a film editor who had cut pictures at 3 different studios over a 30-year career, and who had told his son more than once that the town runs on confidence more than it runs on talent, because talent is common and confidence is rare, and confidence is what gets you a second meeting. Marcus had absorbed this lesson completely. He carried himself the way men carry themselves when they have decided that the appearance of certainty is a tool to be deployed rather than an honest reflection of what they actually know. He had gone to USC Film School. He had made a short film that got into a festival. He had parlayed the short film into a feature deal with an independent financier, and the feature had performed well enough that 2 studios had taken meetings with him in the same month, which in the math of Hollywood in 1988 made him, briefly, a hot commodity. Warner Brothers had given him the second unit assignment as a way of testing him on a controlled set of footage before committing to anything larger. It was supposed to be a low-stakes day. Eastwood had decided to be present, which made it a different kind of day entirely, though Marcus Webb did not yet understand this either. Eastwood, by 1988, had been directing his own pictures for 16 years. He had made Play Misty for Me in 1971, on a budget the studio considered an experiment they expected to lose money on. He had made Bird that same year, a jazz biography that no one in the industry believed had commercial potential, and that Eastwood had made anyway because he believed the story mattered more than the math, and the picture had been received as a serious work by serious critics, the kind of reception that the men who run studios pretend not to care about, and secretly care about a great deal. He had a reputation among crews as a director who worked fast, who did not waste film, who did not waste time, who treated every person on a set, from the gaffer to the leading actor, with the same level, unhurried attention. He did not raise his voice on sets. People who had worked with him for years had never heard him raise his voice. This was not because he lacked authority. It was because he had understood, the way he had understood it from Sergio Leone on a dusty square in Almeria in 1964, that authority demonstrated through volume is authority that is already running low on the genuine kind. Marcus Webb had heard all of this secondhand, the way young directors hear things about older directors, filtered through industry gossip and trade paper profiles, and the particular mythology that Hollywood builds around its survivors. He had decided, privately, that most of it was mythology and not much else. He believed, the way a certain kind of talented young man believes at 29, that the previous generation's reputation was built on opportunities that no longer existed, on a studio system that had rewarded a different kind of competence than the one the industry now required. He believed, specifically, that action stars who had become directors were a transitional phenomenon, men who had been handed keys to the kingdom because audiences liked their faces and who were now being treated with a deference that had nothing to do with actual directorial skill. He had said versions of this to friends at dinner. He had said it without much conviction, the way men say things they have not examined closely but find useful to repeat. He had never said it within earshot of anyone who could repeat it back to the person in question. Today, he was going to say it within earshot of exactly that person, because he did not know Eastwood was sitting 15 feet away in a canvas chair he had assumed was empty. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The morning had gone reasonably well. Marcus had blocked a sequence involving a car arriving at a warehouse exterior, a stunt double standing in for Eastwood's character, 3 camera setups, a controlled fire effect for the 3rd setup. He had been competent. He had not been inspired, but competence was what the day required, and competence was what he delivered through the first 2 setups. The crew had been professional and unremarkable in their assessment of him, the way crews are with directors they have not yet decided whether to trust. By 11:30, the 2nd setup was wrapped, and the crew began resetting for lunch, which on this soundstage was called for 12:15. Marcus walked away from the monitor area toward the craft services table at the edge of the soundstage, where his assistant director and the picture's young cinematographer, a man named Phil Renner, who had shot the short film that launched Marcus's career, were standing with coffee. Marcus had not noticed, walking past the monitor, that Eastwood was still seated in the canvas chair 15 feet behind the monitor cart, partially obscured by a lighting stand and a stack of apple boxes. Eastwood had a script in his lap, open to a page he was not reading. He had a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. He was listening to the way the crew talked to each other, the way they talked about the morning's work, which was a habit he had developed over decades of sets and never abandoned, because the crew's private conversation told a director things that no dailies screening ever would. Marcus reached the craft services table. He picked up a cup of coffee. Phil Renner asked him how he thought the morning had gone. Marcus said it had gone fine, that the setups were clean, that he was glad they were ahead of schedule. He said this in the tone of a man slightly bored by his own competence, the tone of someone who believes the work in front of him is beneath the work he is capable of. Phil Renner, who had worked with Eastwood as a camera operator on an earlier picture before becoming a cinematographer in his own right, mentioned that Eastwood seemed pleased with the dailies from the previous week. Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said, "You know what's funny about Eastwood directing himself for 16 years? Everybody acts like he reinvented the wheel, but half of what people praise about his style is just economy born of low budgets. He shoots fast because the studios never gave him real money until Unforgiven was a decade away from existing. It's not minimalism, it's thrift. And thrift gets called genius if you live long enough." Phil Renner's expression changed slightly. He glanced past Marcus toward the monitor area. Marcus did not notice the glance. He kept talking, warming to a subject he had clearly thought about before and never said quite this directly. He said, "And the acting, let's be honest, the acting is one register. It was a great register for 1971. It is starting to look like a man who learned one trick from an Italian director 20 years ago and has been doing the same trick in front of a camera ever since. I respect the career, I do. But there's a difference between respecting a career and pretending the man currently sitting in a canvas chair behind a monitor cart is the same creative force he was when Leone discovered him. People in this town are so afraid of saying it out loud. The guy's coasting. He's been coasting since the 80s on goodwill and a squint." The assistant director, a woman named Carol Fitch, who had been in the business for 22 years and had worked 3 pictures with Eastwood directly, had gone very quiet. She was looking at Phil Renner. Phil Renner was looking past Marcus's shoulder. Marcus finally noticed that neither of them was looking at him anymore. He turned around. Eastwood was standing 6 feet away. He had set the cold coffee down on the apple boxes. He had closed the script. He was not moving toward Marcus. He was simply standing there, in the particular stillness that Phil Renner recognized from the camera operator's seat. The stillness that meant a man had heard something and had decided, in the space of about 4 seconds, exactly what he intended to do about it. The soundstage around the craft services table had gone quiet, in the way a room goes quiet when 12 people who were not listening a moment ago suddenly are. Gaffers paused mid-task. A boom operator who had been adjusting his pole stopped adjusting it. Eastwood looked at Marcus Webb for a moment. He said, "Finish your coffee, Marcus. We're not breaking for lunch yet." Marcus's face had gone through several stages in about 2 seconds, color rising and then draining. He said, "Clint, I was just—" Eastwood said, "I heard what you were just." He did not raise his voice. The volume was the same volume he had used in every conversation on that soundstage all morning. The volume of a man reading lines off a call sheet. He said, "You think the dailies last week look the way they look because of a budget I didn't have in 1971? He said, "You're half right and you don't know it." He said, "I shot fast in 1971 because the studio gave me 23 days and didn't believe in the picture. I have kept shooting fast since because I learned something on those 23 days that most directors with unlimited time never learn, which is that a scene either works in the first 3 takes or it has a problem that take 11 isn't going to fix. That's not thrift, Marcus. That's a lesson. You can disagree with the lesson. You haven't earned the right to call it an accident." Marcus did not say anything. Eastwood continued in the same even register. He said, "You also said I learned one trick from an Italian director and have been repeating it for 20 years. He said, "Sergio Leone taught me that stillness reads as more than performance." He did not teach me a trick. He taught me a fact about how a camera sees a human face, a fact that is still true, that will still be true after both of us are gone, and that you, Marcus, are going to spend the rest of your career either learning or refusing to learn, and watching which path you choose is going to tell me everything I need to know about whether you have a future in this business worth investing in." The soundstage was completely silent now. Even the air handling system seemed quieter than it had been 5 minutes earlier, though it was not. It was simply that everyone present had stopped making any sound that might compete with what was happening at the craft services table. Carol Fitch had not moved. Phil Renner had not moved. A grip standing near the lighting truss 20 feet away had stopped what he was doing entirely and was watching with the open, unguarded attention of a man who understands he is witnessing something he will tell people about for years. Eastwood said, "I have directed for 16 years, and I have never once raised my voice on a set. And I am not going to start with you, because raising my voice would suggest that what you said requires anger, and it doesn't. It requires correction." He said, "You are 29 years old, and you have one feature to your name and a second unit day that this studio is using to decide whether you are worth a real budget. You spent your lunch break telling the cinematographer who got you that feature deal that the man financing your audition is coasting on a squint." He paused. He said, "That is not arrogance, Marcus. Arrogance I could work with. Arrogance is common in this business, and some of it is even earned. What you just did is something else. You did not know who was in the room." A director who does not know who is in the room is a director who is not paying attention. And a director who is not paying attention is the single most dangerous thing you can put in charge of other people's careers and other people's money. He picked his script back up off the apple boxes. He said, "Finish blocking the third setup. I want to see it before lunch, not after." He turned and walked back toward the monitor area. He sat back down in the canvas chair. He opened the script to the page he had been on. He did not look up again. The soundstage took perhaps 90 seconds to return to normal motion. Carol Fitch was the first to move, walking back toward the set to begin resetting marks for the third setup. Phil Renner picked up his coffee, which had gone cold in his hand, without him noticing. He looked at Marcus Webb for a moment, an expression that was not unkind and was not entirely sympathetic either. The expression of a man who has just watched a colleague learn something the hard way and is privately grateful it was not him. He said quietly, "You want to get the camera reset, or you want a minute?" Marcus said he wanted to get the camera reset. He walked back toward the set on legs that did not feel entirely his own. The third setup that afternoon was, by every account given afterward, the best work Marcus Webb did that day. He blocked it with more attention than he had given the first two setups combined. He consulted Phil Renner twice on lens choice, which he had not done all morning. He asked Carol Fitch a question about continuity that showed he had actually been watching the earlier footage rather than assuming it would cut together. The crew noticed the change. Crews always notice the change. By the end of the day, the gaffer who had paused mid-task during the confrontation told a friend on another production, over drinks that evening, that he had watched a director get rebuilt in real time, 4 minutes flat, no raised voices, no firing, nothing that would ever show up on an incident report, and that the kid had come out the other side of it, shooting better than he had all morning. Marcus Webb did not speak to Eastwood again that day beyond the necessary professional exchanges of a set. He did not apologize directly, not that afternoon. Eastwood did not seem to require one, or, if he did not show it. He had said what needed saying once, at the volume the rest of the day had been conducted in, and he had returned to his canvas chair and his script, and as far as anyone on that set could tell, the matter was finished as completely as it had begun. It was not entirely finished. 3 days later, Marcus Webb sent a handwritten note to Eastwood's production office. Not an email, not a phone call. A handwritten note on plain paper, the kind of gesture that a 29-year-old director makes when he has spent 3 days thinking about exactly what he wants to say and how he wants to say it. The note has never been published. Carol Fitch, who was present when Eastwood read it at a production meeting the following week, has described its contents only in general terms in interviews given many years later. She has said that the note acknowledged the substance of what had been said at craft services, not merely the breach of manners in saying it within earshot, and that it asked for nothing in return. No second chance, no reconsideration, simply an acknowledgement that the thing said had been wrong on its merits, and not only wrong in its timing. Eastwood did not write back. He did not need to. He mentioned to Carol Fitch weeks later, almost in passing, that the kid had a future if he kept learning at the rate he had learned that afternoon. He did not elaborate. Carol Fitch did elaborate, years later, when she was interviewed for an oral history project documenting the working methods of directors who had come up through the studio system of the 60s and 70s. She said that what she remembered most about that afternoon was not the correction itself, but the economy of it. The fact that a man who had every justification for anger, who had been dismissed to his face as a coasting relic by a director 30 years his junior, auditioning for a job that existed only because of the box office Eastwood himself had generated for the studio for 2 decades, had used exactly as many words as the situation required, and not one word more. She said, "I have worked with directors who would have fired that young man on the spot, and directors who would have pretended not to hear and let it fester into something worse later." Clint did neither. He stood up, he said what was true, he sat back down. It is the most efficient correction I have ever watched a human being deliver, and I have been on sets for 40 years. Marcus Webb did not direct a feature for Warner Brothers in the immediate aftermath of that production. The second unit assignment concluded without incident. He worked steadily through the 1990s on smaller pictures, television, commercial work, building, slowly, the kind of career built on competence rather than buzz, which is a different and, in some ways, more durable kind of career than the one he had been on track for at 29. In a 2009 interview given to promote a film he had directed about mentorship in the building trades, an interviewer asked him, almost as an aside, about his early career and whether any single moment had shaped how he approached working with crews. He was quiet for a moment. He said there had been an afternoon early on a job he would rather not specify in detail, when he had said something disrespectful about a director he was working under, not knowing the man could hear him, and the man had corrected him, calmly, completely, in under 5 minutes, without raising his voice and without humiliating him beyond what the moment required. He said it had taught him more about how to run a set than 4 years of film school. He did not say Eastwood's name. The interviewer did not ask him to. Some corrections are meant to travel only as far as the lesson, not as far as the credit. Eastwood went on, in the years that followed, to direct Unforgiven, which won him the Academy Award for Best Director in 1993, and Mystic River, and $1 Million Baby, which won him a second Best Director Oscar in 2005, and a number of other pictures that the industry had, by then, stopped describing as the work of a man coasting on a squint. He never told the craft services story publicly. It survives because Carol Fitch told it decades later in the context of a documentation project that values the small, true things that happened on sets rather than the things press releases were built around. There is no other public record. There was no incident report because nothing happened that required one. There was no headline because nothing was destroyed loudly enough to be a headline. A young man said an arrogant thing about an older man within earshot, and the older man stood up, corrected it completely, and sat back down. And somewhere in the space between those two motions, a career that might have curdled into exactly the kind of coasting it had accused someone else of, found a different shape instead. That is the whole of it. That is what 8 minutes and a lunch break that never happened on schedule actually contained. And unfortunately, they do not make men like that anymore, the kind who can end an argument and build a person in the same 4 sentences. If this story reached you, pass it on. Share it with someone who has had to learn a hard lesson the right way, from someone who cared enough to deliver it without raising their voice. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told.